it's Rachel. I wanted to share with you something that you may not have thought about, and that is the Wailing Wall actually a part of the old temple, or is it something else? Now, if you haven't thought about this, you might be wondering, like, why does this even matter? And there's a huge reason. Because if the Wailing Wall is a part of the old temple, that means Jesus is a liar and Jesus isn't God. Now that's like a huge thing to claim, but let me tell you why it's important. The reason it's important is because Jesus in Matthew 24, he says that no stone will be left on top of each other, that the temple would be completely leveled, completely destroyed. If there's an entire wall, then Jesus was incorrect. And if Jesus was incorrect, or if Jesus is a liar, then Jesus isn't God. Many Christians don't even consider the ramifications of claiming or believing that the Wailing Wall is actually a part of the old temple. But that's why we need to crack our Bibles. Is the Wailing Wall part of the temple? Is Jesus a liar? Is Jesus God? Or was he correct? Let's look at the Bible and see what it has to say about what the temple complex was like and the other surrounding buildings. What a lot of people don't understand is that the Temple Mount isn't flat. It's not like this, it's like this. So you have a taller part and then you have a lower part, so from the top you can see down to the lower part. And we know from Acts 21 that the Romans were able to see what was going on in the temple area because Fort Antonia and the temple were situated next to each other. So Fort Antonia is here, the temple's here, and it's the same mountain. And they saw what was going on in the temple when the Jews were basically forming a mob. They were about to riot, and they kick Paul out of the temple complex. They shut the temple gates behind them, and they are in this area that is between both the temple and Fort Antonia. So the Romans decided that they were going to come down because people were about to have a mob. They grab Paul, the Romans do, because they're going to bring him up to the barracks. And they come down, grab Paul, and then they're taking him upstairs, which is exactly in line with what Josephus says, that you have the fort, you have stairs, you have a bridgeway, and you have the temple. If the Bible is to be believed that the Romans could see down into the temple complex, if where the Wailing Wall is, where's the higher ground? Which part is higher than where the Wailing Wall is? There wasn't a part of a mountain that was knocked down. The Romans weren't in the sky, so obviously on that mountain, the Romans had to have occupied the higher ground. Therefore, any remnants that are left on the higher portion of ground cannot be part of the temple. They have to be part of the Roman fortress, which is what they are. That's part of the Roman fortress of Antonia. You have to understand that Josephus was a rich Jewish rebel who rebelled against the Romans during the Roman-Jewish War, and he was captured, and then he went by the name Titus Flavius Josephus, and he wrote the Jewish history for the Romans. So a lot of what we understand about Jerusalem at that time, we get from Josephus, and he said that if he wasn't there himself, he wouldn't have believed that a temple ever stood because the whole place was leveled. Jerusalem was completely destroyed, but obviously the Romans aren't going to destroy a Roman fort, so Fort Antonia was still standing. We see from other writing that even pilgrims that were coming to Jerusalem in the 300s, so about 250 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, they said that the place was just a complete dump. It was just rocks strewn about that people were scavenging to use on their other building projects. Christians believe that, oh, there has to be a peace agreement with the Muslims so that they can build the temple. But the thing is where the Dome of the Rock is, that's Fort Antonia. The temple doesn't have to be rebuilt there at all because the area where the actual temple stood, it's free and clear. The Muslims don't actually own that portion of land, and I believe that it will come out that the Wailing Wall isn't part of the temple complex. It's part of the Roman fort complex. And when that happens, I believe that the temple will definitely be rebuilt, because the only reason that people are claiming that the Wailing Wall is part of the temple is because what they're saying is they're denying that Jesus is God. Because if there's stones on top of each other, a whole wall of them, then Jesus is a liar and Jesus isn't God. So again, if there's no higher ground above the Wailing Wall, it can't be the temple, because from the Bible we see that the Romans could see down into the temple complex. They had to go down into the temple complex to get Paul, and they brought him upstairs, and that is where he made his claims to the Jews in Aramaic. You see this in Acts chapter 21 verses 34 through 40, where he talks about, hey, I used to persecute Christians, and Jesus himself came to me and said, why do you persecute me? And that is when he became Paul. He got a new name in Christ Jesus, and he decided that he wasn't going to persecute Christians anymore. He was going to follow Jesus. So again, if there's no higher ground above the Wailing Wall, it's clearly part of Fort Antonia. And just for representation, because YouTube doesn't allow anything, they're super extra conservative on free use, I will put links above and in the description box showing you some videos, but I can't show you any copyrighted images on this video. So you have the fort up here, you have the temple down here, you have a small area here that would have stairs, and that's where Paul was. So the Wailing Wall is actually over here, which is the west part, north, east, south, and the temple was on the western side, and the doorway faced east. So Fort Antonia, the Romans could see down into the temple complex. They come down the stairs and the walkway bridge over here. They come get Paul. They lead Paul up the steps and into the barracks. That's all in Acts 21. I think a lot of people, they don't mean to say that Jesus isn't God. It's just something that they haven't considered, but it has huge ramifications, and you have to understand that Jesus is God, and everything that Jesus has said can be verified. So I just wanted to share that with you, something that I wanted you to think about. I hope that you will like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you on Monday. Bye.